In the late months of 1944, the Imperial Japanese Navy looked out across the Pacific with a mixture of confidence and calculation. Years of meticulous planning, technological refinement, and fierce discipline had created the illusion of invincibility. From the deck of a cruiser to the control tower of a Tokyo airfield, commanders believed they had seen every tactic, anticipated every maneuver, and mastered every variable in the theater of modern warfare. Their eyes scanned the horizon, yet what they could not see, or perhaps could not imagine, was approaching at an altitude and speed that defied conventional understanding. Japan, fortified by its naval fleets and air squadrons, had survived waves of American attacks across the Pacific. Battles such as Midway and the Solomon Islands had forced painful lessons, yet the Japanese command remained resolute, confident that their radar arrays, fighter patrols, and anti-aircraft batteries could intercept any threat before it reached the heart of the empire. Tokyo itself, the symbolic and strategic center, seemed untouchable, guarded by layers of defenses designed to repel what was expected. The predictable, the conventional, the familiar, and yet, war has a way of exposing the unforeseen. In the quiet hours before dawn, when city streets lay hushed and the first light shimmered over Mount Fuji, there was a stillness that belied the storm to come. The Imperial Navy, like the rest of the nation, moved in measured confidence, unaware that the next threat would not roar across the waves, but descend silently from the sky. It was a new kind of adversary, immense, relentless, and utterly unconventional. Imagine the scene. Radar operators monitoring the airspace, eyes fixed on glowing blips that represented known aircraft. Pilots ready in their cockpits. Anti-aircraft crews performing their drills with precise, almost ritualistic care. Every procedure had been rehearsed to perfection. And yet none of these measures could account for what was about to appear. It was not a question of bravery or preparation. It was a question of perception. The Japanese had prepared for war as they understood it. But the enemy had chosen to fight it differently. The American B-29 Superfortress, a colossal aircraft that seemed to float effortlessly at altitudes beyond the effective reach of conventional Japanese fighters, was quietly becoming the instrument of a new form of aerial warfare. From thousands of miles away, engineers and strategists had designed a plane that could carry not just bombs, but the power to transform the psychological landscape of the war. For the first time, the skies over Tokyo would be tested by a force that rendered previous assumptions obsolete. How could a single aircraft, or a formation of such planes, penetrate defenses considered impenetrable? This question would haunt the Japanese Navy, exposing a vulnerability not in their courage, nor in their discipline, but in the very way they perceived the world. The calm before the storm was more than a metaphor. It was the fragile pause before reality shattered expectation, before an enemy invisible to conventional detection would change the course of history. To the Japanese Navy in 1944, Allied bombers were a familiar if formidable threat. They had faced waves of B-17s and B-24s in the Pacific theater, machines of steel and firepower that required skill, courage, and coordination to confront. Yet none of these aircraft had ever fully tested the boundaries of imagination or technological ambition. That boundary would soon be crossed with the birth of the B-29 Superfortress, a machine designed not just to survive the skies, but to dominate them in ways previously thought impossible. Conceived in the depths of wartime necessity, the B-29 was a marvel of engineering. It was not merely an airplane, it was a flying fortress, the culmination of innovation, persistence, and extraordinary ingenuity. Pressurized cabins allowed crews to operate comfortably at altitudes where traditional fighters could not reach. Its enormous wingspan and advanced engines granted unprecedented range, giving it the ability to strike targets thousands of miles from its base. And its payload? Colossal. Bombs that could level factories, decimate infrastructure, and force the strategic hand of any nation unprepared for aerial assault on this scale. Yet the B-29 was not born without struggle. Engineers wrestled with engine overheating, structural weaknesses, and the delicate balance of weight versus power. Entire production lines were redesigned to meet the exacting standards of a craft that would redefine warfare. Every rivet, every bolt, and every instrument reflected a singular obsession: to create an aircraft capable of altering the strategic calculus of the war itself. By the time the first B-29s rolled off assembly lines, they represented the convergence of human ingenuity, relentless ambition, and the grim urgency of survival. For the Japanese Navy, this was a revelation they were ill-prepared for. Their intelligence, honed to anticipate conventional threats, had not imagined such a plane. They expected bombers with predictable speeds, altitudes, and vulnerabilities. They did not anticipate a bomber that could cruise above anti-aircraft fire, outrun interceptors at extreme altitudes, and strike with surgical precision hundreds of miles behind enemy lines. The B-29 shattered assumptions simply by existing, a testament to the power of ingenuity applied under pressure. In that moment, the stage was set. The superfortress was not just a weapon. It was a psychological instrument, forcing its adversaries to question the limits of their own defenses. What the Japanese Navy saw, or rather failed to see, was that technology had leaped ahead of expectation. A new era of warfare had arrived, and with it, a formidable challenge: survival in a sky where the rules had changed overnight. By late 1944, Tokyo was a city cocooned in confidence. Its skyline, though scarred by years of war, still gleamed with modern infrastructure, administrative centers, and military installations. Beneath this veneer of normalcy, the Japanese military had constructed a complex web of defenses designed to protect the capital from any conceivable assault. Radar stations dotted the coastline, air patrols crisscrossed the skies, and naval units patrolled the Pacific approaches with relentless precision. Every layer was intended to serve as an early warning, a network of eyes and ears that would allow the empire to detect, intercept, and annihilate any approaching threat. Japanese naval intelligence prided itself on anticipating the movements of the Allied forces. Reports flowed constantly: reconnaissance flights, intercepted communications, and coded messages all contributed to a belief that no attack could reach Tokyo undetected. Officers and planners worked with meticulous detail, drawing diagrams, mapping patrol routes, and calculating interception times with mathematical rigor. In their minds, the chain of detection was foolproof, a lattice of vigilance stretching from the outer Pacific to the heart of the city. Yet the very confidence that structured these defenses became a double-edged sword. The Navy, trained to trust in its systems, rarely questioned the assumptions that underpinned them. They expected enemy aircraft to behave as enemy aircraft always had, flying predictable altitudes, following known approaches, and falling within the effective range of Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft guns. Their entire doctrine relied on what was visible, what could be measured, and what history had taught them. The unseen, the unprecedented, was largely dismissed. This overconfidence created a blind spot, a gap in perception that no radar line, no patrol plane, and no layer of anti-aircraft artillery could cover. And it was this very blind spot that the B-29, with its extraordinary altitude and range, was about to exploit. The planes could approach quietly, almost invisibly, above the reach of traditional defenses, carrying devastation into the heart of the empire without warning. In the calm hours before dawn, Tokyo's skies appeared secure. Airfields were staffed, radar screens were monitored, and commanders sipped coffee, confident that any anomaly would be detected well in advance. Yet history shows us that confidence is not the same as preparedness. The illusion of safety can be as dangerous as no defense at all. The Japanese Navy, like so many strategists before them, had constructed an empire of certainty atop a foundation that could not account for radical innovation. The stage was set for a dramatic revelation. The calm, meticulously orchestrated defenses of Tokyo were about to be tested in a way no one could have anticipated. What they could not see, the superfortress gliding silently at unreachable altitudes, would soon expose the fragility of their assumptions. In that moment, the line between perceived security and reality would vanish, leaving the capital vulnerable to a threat that had been invisible all along. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly. On a crisp morning, as the sun began to climb over Tokyo Bay, radar operators at a coastal station noticed a faint signal on their screens. At first it seemed like another routine flight, another blip in the endless traffic of reconnaissance and transport planes. But within minutes the anomaly grew unmistakably clear. Something was coming. Something far beyond the Japanese Navy's experience. As eyes scanned the horizon, the first B-29s emerged, shimmering in the morning light like colossal shadows suspended between sea and sky. Pilots on patrol squinted upward, their trained instincts telling them these were not ordinary bombers. They were faster than anything they had encountered, higher than the ceiling of Japanese fighters, and far more numerous than any previous reconnaissance reports had suggested. One by one, the reality crystallized. The superfortress was here. Shock rippled through the ranks. Radar operators double-checked their instruments, assuming error. Ground crews dropped their tools, staring skyward in disbelief. Anti-aircraft batteries adjusted their calculations, only to discover the altitude of these machines placed them beyond reach. The conventional strategies that had kept Tokyo safe suddenly seemed inadequate. Every measure meticulously planned, every defensive layer carefully mapped, was suddenly outmatched by sheer innovation. For the Navy, the psychological impact was as significant as the physical threat. These were not mere aircraft, they were symbols of a new reality. Ordinary defenses, once considered impenetrable, now appeared almost irrelevant. The calculations of commanders, the drills of fighters, the predictions of intelligence analysts, all had underestimated the scope of this technological leap. The enemy had redefined the battlefield while the Japanese defenders clung to assumptions rooted in yesterday's wars. Yet even in this moment of panic, there was a strange elegance to the sight. The B-29s, moving in disciplined formation, seemed to float above the chaos they would soon unleash. Their sheer size and altitude rendered them untouchable, creating a sense of awe mixed with fear. Observers would later recall the surreal feeling of looking up at these flying fortresses, realizing that the very sky they had taken for granted as a domain of control was now contested in ways previously unimaginable. In that instant, the illusion of security dissolved. Tokyo's defenses, built on confidence and careful calculation, faced a challenge that could not be met with conventional thinking. The first sightings were not merely a warning, they were a revelation. The enemy had arrived not with brute force alone, but with ingenuity, precision, and the ability to exploit what was unseen. And as the B-29s continued their approach, the Japanese Navy confronted a truth they had long ignored. The most dangerous threats are often the ones you cannot detect until it is too late. As the first reports came in from radar stations and early warning posts, panic rippled through the Japanese Navy and Air Force. Pilots were scrambled, fighters launched, and anti-aircraft batteries opened fire. Yet the enemy they faced was unlike anything their training had prepared them for. These were the B-29 superfortresses, machines that had been engineered to render conventional defenses almost irrelevant. The technical superiority of the B-29 was staggering. Flying at altitudes of 30,000 feet, well above the ceiling of most Japanese fighters, the bombers seemed untouchable. Their speed and maneuverability allowed them to traverse hundreds of miles of hostile territory without detection or interception, and their payloads were extraordinary. Hundreds of pounds of high-explosive bombs capable of obliterating industrial complexes, infrastructure, and urban districts. Every detail of the aircraft's design had been calibrated to optimize both survival and destructive efficiency. From the Japanese perspective, the encounter was bewildering. Radar screens had detected the bombers too late, giving fighters precious little time to engage. Those pilots who reached the altitude of the B-29s found themselves outmatched, the heavy bomber immune to traditional air combat tactics. Anti-aircraft gunners adjusted their aim frantically, only to discover that at such altitudes their shells fell harmlessly short. Each defensive layer that had been so carefully orchestrated suddenly seemed inadequate, a series of fragile illusions crumbling under the weight of innovation. Despite this, the B-29s executed their mission with chilling precision. Crews operated with disciplined coordination, adjusting altitude and formation to maximize coverage and minimize risk. Bombs were released over designated targets with meticulous accuracy, striking the city in patterns that reflected careful intelligence, advanced planning, and flawless execution. The psychological effect on Japanese defenders was profound. The enemy was not just attacking, it was outthinking them, outmaneuvering them, and operating beyond their expectations. What made this encounter so shocking was the gulf between expectation and reality. The Japanese Navy had been trained to anticipate raids by familiar aircraft with predictable capabilities. The superfortress shattered these assumptions. In minutes, the airspace over Tokyo had transformed from a domain of control to a landscape of helplessness. The defenders' skills, honed over years of conflict, were rendered almost irrelevant. In retrospect, the lesson is clear. Technology alone can shift the balance of power, but it is the combination of innovation, strategy, and audacity that truly alters outcomes. The B-29s had not merely penetrated Japanese airspace, they had exposed the limits of human anticipation, revealing a stark truth about warfare. The most dangerous adversaries are often those who operate in ways you cannot see coming. As Tokyo's defenders scrambled, exhausted and frustrated, The city itself bore witness to a new era of aerial warfare, one where ingenuity and unseen advantage dictated the terms of survival. Amid the steel and engines, amid the altitudes and technical precision, this story is, at its heart, human. Above the Pacific, thousands of feet in the air, American B-29 crews faced a world that tested courage, endurance, and resolve. Each bomber carried not just bombs, but the weight of strategy, the lives of comrades, and the unspoken responsibility of altering the course of a war. Inside the pressurized cabins, pilots monitored instruments, adjusted altitudes, and scanned the sky for threats invisible to the naked eye. The roar of the engines was constant, almost hypnotic, as the plane sailed over enemy territory that could, at any moment, unleash destruction upon them. For these men, fear was never absent. It was disciplined, harnessed, and channeled into action. Every decision was calculated. When to climb, when to adjust course, when to release payloads. Each choice carried consequences, not only for the success of the mission but for the survival of the crew. Fatigue pressed upon them as relentlessly as the altitude itself, yet their focus remained absolute. These were moments when human ingenuity met mechanical marvel, a delicate partnership of mind, reflex, and machine. Below them, Japanese gunners and pilots faced a mirror challenge of their own. Radar operators tracked the approaching shadows, signaling to anti-aircraft batteries and scrambling interceptors. The adrenaline of uncertainty sharpened every movement, yet their efforts were constrained by the unexpected. Ordinary drills became desperate improvisations. A gunner's finger hovered over triggers, eyes fixed skyward, knowing that every miscalculation could allow destruction to fall closer to home. Pilots ascended toward unreachable heights, straining every skill to close the distance, only to find the enemy seemingly untouchable. In these moments, both sides shared an unspoken truth. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. The B-29 crews confronted invisible threats, turbulence, and the constant hum of danger. The Japanese defenders confronted the invisible weight of the unseen, the frustration of outmatched skill, and the emotional strain of defending loved ones below. These stories, the split-second decisions, the racing hearts, the quiet bravery, transformed the narrative from a tale of machines to a tale of humans grappling with the extraordinary. History often reduces events to statistics, bomb tonnage, or strategic outcomes. Yet it is within these human experiences, the tension, the fear, the ingenuity under pressure, that the true drama resides. The skies above Tokyo became a stage not just for technology, but for courage, for resilience, and for the raw human will to act in the face of uncertainty. And as the B-29s continued their flight, each crew member, each gunner's eye, each split-second decision contributed to a story that resonates far beyond that single raid. A story of humanity confronted by the unimaginable, yet rising to meet it. In the command rooms of the Imperial Japanese Navy, disbelief hung heavy in the air. Reports from radar stations trickled in, each message adding to a growing sense of unease. Commanders pored over maps and data, struggling to reconcile what they had been trained to expect with the stark reality unfolding above their city. For the first time in the conflict, their defenses had been outflanked, not by cunning tactics, but by sheer technological innovation. Communication lines became a tangle of urgency and confusion. Orders were dispatched to scramble fighters, to reposition anti-aircraft batteries, to intercept the advancing bombers. Yet messages were delayed, misinterpreted, or lost in the chaos of rapid escalation. By the time pilots received clearance to climb, the B-29s were already beyond effective reach. Radar operators who had long prided themselves on precision confronted the limits of their instruments. Each misstep, each delay, magnified the perception of helplessness. Pride and panic collided in sharp contrast. The Navy, steeped in tradition and disciplined execution, was accustomed to controlling the flow of battle. Yet here was a force that operated beyond expectation, undermining every assumption they had relied upon. Officers felt the tension between professional confidence and the stark realization that they were unprepared. For many, the initial shock evolved into despair, a sense that the rules of engagement they had mastered were suddenly obsolete. The psychological toll was profound. Men trained to anticipate threats found themselves confronting the impossible. A bomber's formation seemingly suspended above the clouds, untouchable, precise, and relentless. The sense of control, so carefully maintained through years of planning and observation, dissolved under the weight of technological surprise. The Navy's reputation for vigilance, for anticipating enemy movements, was challenged in a way that cut to the core of their professional identity. Yet within the chaos, patterns of adaptation began to emerge, small sparks of ingenuity born from necessity. Officers noted the vulnerabilities that had allowed the B-29s to penetrate defenses. Pilots adjusted flight paths. Anti-aircraft crews experimented with range and timing. These attempts, though limited, hinted at a timeless truth of conflict. Even when confronted with the unprecedented, human determination seeks a path forward. The Japanese Navy's experience that morning was not just a story of failure, it was a story of revelation. Pride, panic, and despair coexisted in a delicate, dangerous balance, exposing the human cost of underestimating unseen forces. It was a lesson etched into memory. In warfare, as in life, the most formidable threats are often those that challenge not just tactics, but perception itself. The morning after the B-29's first raid, Tokyo awoke to more than just smoke and debris. It awoke to a profound strategic reckoning. The Imperial Japanese Command, long confident in its ability to defend the capital, now faced a sobering truth. Their assumptions about the limits of aerial warfare had been shattered. What had seemed impossible, bombers reaching the heart of the empire with impunity, was now reality, and it demanded an urgent rethinking of strategy. Across command rooms and naval headquarters, officers debated responses with urgency, bordering on desperation. Radar networks were examined for blind spots. Fighter squadrons were reassigned, relocated, and retrained. Anti-aircraft batteries were repositioned to cover gaps that had never seemed relevant before. Entire resource allocations were reimagined in real time as the Japanese military sought to patch vulnerabilities exposed in a single decisive morning. The B-29s had done more than deliver ordnance. They had delivered a wake-up call. This period of strategic shockwaves illuminated a timeless truth. Innovation can transform the battlefield in ways that no prior experience can anticipate. The Japanese command was forced to confront the vulnerability inherent not just in their technology, but in their mindset. For decades, they had relied on the predictability of conventional aerial warfare. They had assumed that speed, altitude, and coordination would remain within human and mechanical limits they understood. The superfortress invalidated every assumption. Yet amid the crisis, adaptation emerged as both necessity and survival. The Japanese Navy began dispersing resources across multiple fronts, building redundancies where before they had concentrated strength. Air patrols were extended, defensive formations reconfigured, and communication protocols overhauled. While these measures could not erase the technological gap, they demonstrated the power of human ingenuity to respond to the unforeseen. Innovation, it seemed, was a two-way street. One side creates the challenge, the other must confront it with rapid, sometimes improvisational adaptation. The lessons extended beyond strategy. The psychological impact was equally profound. Confidence, once unquestioned, gave way to vigilance tempered by humility. Commanders realized that assumptions, no matter how carefully grounded in history and precedent, could be overturned by forces invisible until the moment they appear. Tokyo itself became a symbol not just of resilience, but of vulnerability. The recognition that even the most fortified systems can be undone when innovation meets unpreparedness. In the end, the B-29 campaign was a masterclass in the intersection of technology, psychology, and strategic thought. It demonstrated that in warfare, as in life, the unseen variables, the ones beyond measurement, prediction, or expectation, often dictate outcomes more decisively than any visible force. For Japan, the raids were not merely tactical events. They were a lesson etched in smoke and steel. The most important data is often the one you cannot see, and survival depends on the courage to adapt once the invisible is revealed. History, when examined closely, is rarely about the events themselves. It is about the lessons they leave behind. The B-29 raids over Tokyo offer more than a narrative of destruction. They offer a masterclass in preparedness, adaptation, and the consequences of overconfidence. For the Imperial Japanese Navy, the surprise was devastating not because of bravery or discipline, but because of assumptions left unexamined. They had built their defenses on patterns of the past, believing that what had worked before would continue to work. The arrival of the superfortress proved that such reliance could be catastrophic. This lesson transcends war. In any domain where decisions carry weight, overconfidence and outdated frameworks can be dangerous. Leaders who assume the future will mirror the past often find themselves unprepared for innovation, disruption, or the unforeseen. Whether in business, science, or personal growth, The most decisive advantage comes from recognizing what cannot be seen, the hidden forces, the emerging patterns and the variables that lie beyond conventional expectation. The Japanese Navy's blind spot was not merely technological, it was conceptual. They failed to imagine a threat that defied precedent, and that failure carried profound consequences. Yet the story is not solely one of failure. The raids also reveal the human capacity for adaptation. Once the vulnerability was recognized, rapid adjustments began. Radar coverage expanded, patrols were repositioned, and defensive doctrine was revised. While these efforts could not immediately reverse the damage, they illustrate a timeless principle. Survival depends not only on preparation, but on the ability to rethink, recalibrate, and respond under pressure. Flexibility, courage, and curiosity often outweigh rigid confidence in established systems. The B-29 campaign also highlights a subtle but powerful truth about perception. Much of human decision-making is based on what is visible, on data, observation, and experience. Yet the invisible often matters most. In the skies above Tokyo, the most critical information was the one they could not detect. An aircraft operating beyond expected parameters, challenging assumptions, and rewriting the rules of engagement. To anticipate the unseen is not merely a military strategy, it is a principle applicable to every aspect of life, from leadership to personal growth. In the end, the raids teach a profound, universal lesson. Preparedness is more than a checklist. Adaptation is more than reaction. True insight lies in questioning assumptions, anticipating the unpredictable, and acting decisively when confronted with forces that exceed expectation. The superfortress was more than a machine of war. It was a mirror, reflecting the timeless truth that the most important data is often the one you cannot see. Those who learn to see it gain the rarest advantage: foresight in a world defined by uncertainty. The appearance of the B-29 superfortress over Tokyo was more than a tactical moment in a single war. It was a symbol of the transformative power of vision, ingenuity, and audacity. In the skies above Japan, innovation met ambition, creating a reality that could not have been predicted by conventional strategy or experience. The superfortress was not merely a machine of destruction. It was a revelation, a demonstration that bold engineering and disciplined execution could redefine the limits of what was possible. In the months and years that followed, the psychological and strategic impact of the B-29 campaign rippled across the Pacific theater. Commanders on both sides were forced to reassess doctrines, anticipate the unprecedented, and confront the uncomfortable truth that technological advantage could shift the balance of power almost overnight. The superfortress became more than a bomber. It became a symbol of adaptability, innovation, and the relentless drive to challenge assumptions. Its presence above Tokyo exposed vulnerabilities, but it also illuminated the potential of foresight, preparation, and ingenuity when combined with courage and precision. Yet the true legacy of the superfortress lies not solely in military history. It is a story that resonates across time and across disciplines. It is a reminder that the greatest breakthroughs, whether in war, science, or human endeavor, often arise from the intersection of vision and execution. The B-29 was the product of engineers who dared to think beyond conventional limits, strategists who envisioned new ways to project power, and crews who executed their missions under extreme conditions. Together, they demonstrated a principle as relevant today as it was then. Audacity, coupled with preparation, can produce results that defy expectation. For the Japanese defenders, the lessons were sobering but enduring. They faced the reality that assumptions could be challenged, that overconfidence could be costly, and that unseen threats often carry the most decisive consequences. In the long arc of the Pacific conflict, the raids over Tokyo forced a reevaluation of strategy, a redistribution of resources, and a heightened awareness of the invisible forces shaping the battlefield. This dual narrative, the story of audacious innovation and the cost of unanticipated vulnerability, remains a universal lesson in risk, foresight, and resilience. Ultimately, the superfortress represents more than a historical event. It embodies a timeless truth. The greatest surprises often arrive where vision meets technology, where daring meets meticulous planning, and where the limits of expectation are tested against the ingenuity of human endeavor. In those rare intersections, the world shifts, not incrementally but fundamentally. As we look back on the skies above Tokyo, we are reminded that history is shaped as much by the unseen, the unimagined, and the boldly executed as by the predictable and the routine. The legacy of the unexpected superfortress is a testament to human creativity, courage, and the enduring power of challenging what we think we know.